What's up, everybody? Happy Friday to you. A big week coming up, a big weekend coming up. The Bengals are set to face one of their biggest foes, but not within the division, in the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He is John Sheeran. And we have a special guest again. We got a special guest this week to help us preview. We'll bring him on in just a second. John, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good, man, but this is a division rivalry. It's the Midwest, you know. We're all neighbors over here, and this is the sixth time since, I believe, the second day of 2022 that these two teams will face. So, I mean, they might as well be in division rivals at this point.
Yeah, we're going to bring in one of our favorites. He is one of the co-hosts of the BLEAV Chiefs podcast. He is a former Kansas City Chief himself, and we've had some great talks over the years with this gentleman here, Mr. Joe Valerio, joining us on the program. Happy to have you back, sir. I know time is at a premium, but how are you?
Oh, Anthony, it's great to be with you and John and all the Bengals nation there to catch up on this game. And you're right, John, this has become quite a rivalry, and it almost does feel like a division rivalry. I mean, they've played enough, right, between playoffs and regular season. The NFL schedulers are masters, aren't they? They know how to get these games in there and get to play an AFC opponent. It used to be in the old days, you had to wait several years until the NFC East came around or the NFC West came around. Nowadays, they're like, who cares? We need ratings. Let's let those teams play. So we saw that last year with the Eagles and Chiefs playing during the regular season, even though they weren't really slated to. But yeah, it's great to be with you guys. It's going to be a great game. It's what a rivalry.
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of fell a little flat last year with Burrow being hurt at the end of the year. That game was going to mean potentially a lot more. It still meant something, despite Burrow being out. But obviously, this one now, big week ahead. Just to kind of start off, your impressions of the Chiefs in their opener. They got the mini bye now. They're home again for the Bengals, hosting them. So just how you felt they came out of the gates in week one and how they're positioning themselves going into week two to host the Bengals.
Well, I got to be honest, like when Jeff Fedotin, my podcast partner on BLEAV, were looking at the schedule, we're like, oh man, like there's a chance that the Chiefs could be 2-2 coming out of these first four games. There's a chance they could be 0-2 coming out of the first two. And that was a possibility because, you know, I think Tony Romo says it a lot on air. Sometimes I think Jeff Fedotin and I coined the phrase, but we'll leave that up to the patent and trademark people. But September is definitely the new preseason, right? I mean, it's definitely the time of the year where teams are just getting their sea legs under them, right? I mean, it's not like when I was playing, guys. Like when I played in the 90s, when you got through training camp, you played pretty much like half a season between how much starters and how much the first reserves played in preseason games and how hard we practiced during the week. I mean, my rookie year in 1991, we went 13 days in a row of full pad two-a-days with a special teams practice in the evening. So we were ready to play. Like, let's just put it that way. And I'm not, I don't want to sound like one of those guys. Oh, I walked uphill to school both ways in the snow with no shoes. Like, I don't want to sound like one of those leather helmet guys. But we did work differently. And I think, again, this is a long answer to a short question. What I think Andy Reid has done with this team this year is he has prepared them for this beginning of the season, probably more than any, maybe not any team, but definitely more than any Chiefs team that I've seen come out of the gates in the recent history, in the recent era, because they really seem to be hitting on all cylinders, and they needed to, because you got Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow in your first two games, along with two teams that are incredible rivals. So I think Andy worked the guys a little bit differently at camp this year. I think they hit a little bit more I think they were ready for this game. And that's my overall first impression, is that, number one, physically and mentally, they were prepared to treat the preseason a little bit more seriously. Is going to sound like a bad word. These guys are professionals, but they treated it a little bit differently to get the guys ready. And also, this team didn't do a lot. I'm not saying they're in run it back mode. Did that a couple years ago where they basically didn't change one person on the roster. I think of the 22 starters after they won that first Super Bowl, they went in with like 20 of the 22 starters. Like, I'm not saying they were taking that full blown mentality, but they definitely did everything they could to lock everybody up that they could lock up, other than L'Jarius Sneed and Willie Gay Jr. You just can't keep everybody. But long story long, another long answer to a relatively short question. I think they prepared to keep this team intact to see if it could be the one, and if it is indeed the chemistry they need to get 3 in a row.
Yeah, offseason preparation has been a hot topic in Cincinnati, coming off of a stinker after a lot of comments about changes in preseason preparation. But just after one game, we all know that week one doesn't mean that much in the grand scheme of things, and teams can obviously change. But just from your perspective, in terms of the things that you were looking for how, like, the Chiefs personnel, how their scheme, how anything that you expected to look, did week one kind of tell you anything about that, or is it still far too early to kind of tell where the trajectory is, I guess?
No, it's a really great question. They put a lot of emphasis on motions this year. I think that it seems like that was Andy's baby, Andy and Matt Nagy, the offensive coordinator. I think motioning and getting teams thinking differently about where they're going to have players at the snap of the ball is something that they worked on. That was pretty prevalent in the first game. They had some motions that were a little bit different. I think, obviously with Xavier Worthy, they went back to sort of the speed thing, right? To see if they could get somebody who could stretch the field both horizontally and vertically, which they kind of really haven't had since Tyreek Hill. They've tried, different things. They thought maybe Kadarius Toney might be that guy. He obviously didn't work out. But they are definitely moving back towards more of a speed type mentality with the receivers. And when you look at, who's going to be starting games now, obviously Hollywood Brown, I don't think he's going to play. But he's a guy that can stretch the field. And I think once he's healthy, if you have him, Rashee Rice, and Xavier Worthy, I think it gives Andy Reid and Matt Nagy, and of course Patrick Mahomes, because he's out there one doing it, gives him a lot of weapons and really opens the playbook up. I think what they've done in the backfield, to pick up, some players to sort of see if they can be a little bit more physical. I think Pirine was a good pickup. Samaje Pirine was a good pickup because he's going to be just as physical as Isaiah Pacheco. I mean, he's a guy that lifted up a car once in college to save somebody. And then you throw in Carson Steele, who was like the darling of camp. Clyde Edwards-Helaire's kind of been pushed back to the back of the depth chart. So it's kind of like mixing the speed on the outside with these receivers, along with sort of Isaiah Pacheco, Samaje Perine, who like basically run like they hate the ground. So I think, and then of course, Travis, right, who could post up like a great NBA center in the middle of the field there and get open and make easy high percentage catches. So it's a good combination of what they needed to do, I think, this offseason to keep developing Andy's playbook. He is always trying to stay one step ahead of the D coordinators.
Talking with former Kansas City offensive lineman and current co-host of the BLEAV in Chiefs podcast, Joe Valerio. Going to spend a couple more minutes with him. Thanks for the time, Joe. Always love picking your brain on some things here. There's a series on Cincy Jungle that we do where we call like 5 questions with the enemy or something like that, where we go back and forth and we volley people, kind of, hey, give us the lay of the land from your side of the hedges kind of thing. And one of the questions I posed, and I haven't received the answer yet, is really just kind of what's really the weakness of the Kansas City Chiefs? Because right now it feels like, for a handful of years, it was a lot about the offense and can they stop some people on defense? This feels like a really complete Chiefs team across the board. It feels like the roster has filled out nicely. They've hit some pretty well on some draft picks at different spots. So Bengals are a little bit banged up, but coming into this, tough atmosphere, tough team, big game early in the season. What can the Bengals exploit here for the Kansas City Chiefs in your estimation?
Oh, that's a great question, and I think when I look at this team, the Chiefs team was the perfect sort of um, response to the cliche that defenses win championships and offenses win games. And I think if you had to sum up the Chiefs in one cliched football phrase or sports phrase, it was that the Chiefs defense is what won them the championship. The offense won games, uh, but man, all they needed to do was score more points than the vaunted Chiefs defense was letting up, which was not a lot, right? I mean, if the Chiefs were scoring 20, 21 points, they were winning games, well. And I think that combination, that chemistry has been sort of the secret sauce of watching them win 2 Super Bowls. They've developed a defense that is aggressive. They've developed a defense that is fast at the linebacker position, and the linebackers are small. So if I had to pick a weakness, it would be the fact that, if you get to the second level in the running game, I mean, Nick Bolton, Drew Tranquil, he was an unbelievable pickup last year. Leo Chenal, great draft pick. Like, if you get to that level with a big bruising back, that might be the thing, if teams could eat the clock up and keep Patrick Mahomes off the field, that's what they would want to do. It's a tough defensive line to get past, but if you did, I mean, they've got good run support in their safeties and corners, but they're a little light in the linebacking core. They're physical, but they're just a little light. I thought Derrick Henry was going to be the guy that did that in this last game, and I can't believe Lamar Jackson outrushed him. I thought that the Ravens were just going to pound Derrick Henry, and they couldn't. The Chiefs stopped him. They stopped him at the line. They didn't let him get to the next level. But if he could get to the next level with a good offensive line who can zone block and get to backers with a power back like Derrick Henry, that's probably where I see, if I had to pick one little thing, I would see as the weak spot right now on the entire Chiefs team. And obviously that was focused on defense. On offense, it's hard to find a weakness right now. Their offensive line, going into camp, there was obviously the big battle at left tackle with Kingsley Suamataya, and as a rookie coming in and playing left tackle, and Juwan Taylor's had some things with the yips of as far as like jumping off sides and like bouncing around out there. That we thought was going to be the weakness. Their interior 3 are best you're going to get. 3 guys all together. I can't find a group of 3 that are better. You might find a left guard that's better than Joe Tooney. I don't know if you're going to find a center now that Jason Kelsey's gone better than Creed Humphrey. Trey Smith, there might be a right guard that's better out there somewhere. You put the 3 of them together and you add up all their scores. I don't think you're getting anything better than that. So the tackle spots, I think, might be on offense their weakest spot. If you can get some edge rushers who can rush a little bit more disciplined and keep Patrick in the pocket. Like, you don't want to let him find the pocket in the pocket. So on offense, if I were a Bengals fan, I'd be watching those matchups on the outside to see if they can contain Patrick Mahomes and not rush him too fast, because that's actually a detriment. And then I would see if the Bengals can get something going in the running game and attack the middle of the field or even off tackle with some second level runs. I think that might be where they could make some hay.
Well, this is a lot earlier than we're used to seeing Bengals versus Chiefs. There's a lot of things we don't know about this season, but Joe, we appreciate your time, man. I know you got to get out of here. Do you have a prediction about how this game's going to turn out?
I mean, guys, I don't want to have a lot of people throwing oranges at me here, looking at your orange and black background. Because the receipts are out there. I did it on some radio stations in Kansas City. We did it on our podcast. And look, you guys know, I've been with you guys a bunch. I'm a very objective football fan. I'm not a homer. Like, even though I cover the Chiefs and I played for the Chiefs, like, I've predicted times where, I thought they would lose and they did. And I predicted times when I thought they'd lose and they didn't. So I'm not about that. I have a weird feeling, again, and I know your listeners are going to be mad at me. And I hope you have me back, but I have a feeling that the Chiefs are going to run away with this one a little bit. And I know, and I don't want to be that guy that creates controversy. I don't want to add fuel to the locker room fire that is the Bengals-Chiefs relationship. But I do believe that this game, and I look, I know your fans hope I'm wrong. There's part of me that hopes I'm wrong because I don't like to see blowouts, but I have a feeling this game's going to go Chiefs' favor, and I'm predicting like 31-14. I'm sorry,
Ooh,
guys.
wow.
I hate to say it.
Homer.
I have a lot of respect for the Bengals. I do. I just have a feeling that the chemistry right now, week 2, for the Bengals isn't there. Now, granted, they're going to come in with a swagger. Joe Burrow is going to come in with a swagger. He's going to lead that team to Arrowhead, and they're going to be playing with a lot of emotion, and that emotion is going to carry them, and it's going to do well. There's something, as I watch the game as an objective fan, there's something a little bit missing in the Bengals right now that if maybe we're playing this game in the AFC playoffs 15, 16 weeks from now, it's a 3-point game, because I know that the Bengals are going to continue to get better. They're going to find that chemistry. I just think today, meaning this week, I think the Chiefs have a little bit more going in that realm. That's just, I hate to say it, but this is an objective point of view.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it sounds like it's both an indictment of the Bengals a little bit and a elevation of where the Chiefs are, and that makes sense. Joe, before we get you out of here, thanks for the time. Where can people find your stuff? Where, when, all that good stuff?
Yeah, sure. No, it's great. We do a weekly podcast, Jeff Fedotin and me. We do a podcast on the BLEAV network, BLEAV, and it's you can find it on all your podcast mediums: Stitcher, Spotify, Luminaria, anywhere Apple you find your podcast. I'm also on Radio 810 in Kansas City in the mornings. Usually it's on Tuesdays, and then Twitter, X at Joe Valerio 73. Usually promote the show and some things that are going on. So that's basically where you can find me. If I'm not in some insurance brokerage boardroom somewhere selling insurance, corporate insurance. So,
well, you're the man. We appreciate you. Thanks for coming on short notice, and we love having you on. We'd love talking ball with you. I know you got to get out of here, but maybe if these teams clash in the playoffs, we'll have you back on later in the season.
I hope even if they don't, guys, I love being with you guys. So anytime.
Right. I appreciate that. Take care.
All right. See you, fellas.
All
Thanks,
right.
Joe.
That is Mr. Joe Valerio, former Kansas City offensive lineman and host of one of the co-hosts of the BLEAV in Chiefs podcast. You heard him; he's on local Kansas City radio as well. Love that guy. He's smart. He brings a perspective that is. I mean, there is a little homerism there, but I do think there is objectivity there, right? I mean, I think if you look,
I was kidding.
I mean, it really. Obviously, I mean, he's deeply entrenched and ingrained with the Chiefs and whatnot on a number of levels, media side and player side. But I mean, if you look at the outputs of both of the teams in their first couple of weeks, it's not that big of a conclusion for him to jump to come to that possible prediction.
No, I mean, he's an offensive lineman. It's the smartest people on the field, even after your playing days are done. So right. Phenomenal football mind. But yeah, I mean, the timing of this game, and as we transition to just talking about this, the timing of this game has always been interesting since it was first announced, because the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes specifically is just a superhero in September. And Andy Reid specifically, not the greatest record around this time, but he himself has always been dominant. And Joe Burrow is the exact opposite at this time of year. And that's become a conversation now that last Sunday happened. So the fact that these two guys are facing off so early in the season was always going to be an interesting dynamic. But yeah, Joe's right. Just the difference in how both locker rooms, both teams are kind of, dealing with how the beginning of the season happened on two different sides of the spectrum. It does lead to, Sunday could just be a firestorm in many ways. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks to him for joining us. And by the way, this is the Orange and Black Insider also part of the BLEAV network, part of the BLEAV in Cincy podcast channel. And it's our show, Jason and Kevin doing 3 and Out, who I think did an episode last night, if I'm not mistaken, or put that out there yesterday. And we also are working with Bengal Jim, talking football with Bengal Jim and friends. He's usually Tuesday, Wednesday by the time that episode rolls around. You've got Matt and Willie No Ball as well with the great Willie Letts and the coach, Matt Minnick. And you got us yakking at you a couple times a week as well. So we're trying to get you some stuff every day of the week, especially during the season, if not more than that. So hopefully you're enjoying the content. Whether you get it on the audio side, please resubscribe to the BLEAV in Cincy podcast channel on your favorite audio streamer. iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, as Mr. Valerio just pointed out with his show as well. Or if you like the video side of things, you got to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're streaming live there. And that you can, underneath John there and the Cincy Jungle icon, you can hit the Orange and Black Insider Show icon. Click that. Click the bell to be notified when we go live, when new content is available. Give us a thumbs up if you like what we're doing there. Subscribe, all that good stuff. And then, of course, keep it to Cincy Jungle's Facebook page. We stream live there, as well as a number of Twitter accounts. CincyJungle.com. We've got some Bengals analysis. And, of course, John doing his great stuff over at A to Z Sports. John, we're doing Bengals news tomorrow, the little news clips, and I think one of your clips is headlining it, my friend. So we're gonna,
oh wow,
yeah, it's big. You're big time, dude. You're big time. So, hey, so yeah, we appreciate all the support, and we'll keep at it with you throughout the season. Let's kind of get to this. We teed this up a little bit on the aftermath episode, right? Like what do the Bengals need to do differently? Who are some of the important players? But as now some more information comes to us later in the week from an injury standpoint, looks like T. Higgins will not play. Looks like Amarius Mims will not play at this point. A couple of others doubtful. And you heard now, I'm going to start spinning this based on the question that I asked Joe, which was, where's the weakness, right? Where are the weak spots potentially? And he mentioned the tackles, and we talked about pass rush for the Bengals last week, and it was a lot of Trey Hendrickson and a lot of nothing else. So the Bengals need to get Joseph Osai going and on the field more often. They're going to need to get more from Sam Hubbard this week. They're going to need to generate pressure. And like Joe said, that edge pressure to keep Patrick in that pocket, not let him ad-lib too much, not let him scramble, throw on the run, do the backyard football stuff. Do what Lou Anarumo has done to frustrate Patrick Mahomes in those games that the Bengals have ended up winning, which is kind of disallow him to ad-lib so much.
Yeah, and the last time the Bengals had beaten the Chiefs, you had both Jesse Bates and Von Bell back there. Obviously, last year, the whole dynamic of the matchup was changed when Joe Burrow wasn't there, and the stakes weren't as high, but you had a completely different type of defensive philosophy or just restrictions with a lack of safety play. Hopefully, Geno Stone apparently appeared on the injury report today with like a back injury, but assuming he does play, you have Geno Stone and Von Bell back there, and I think you have more trust in your safeties for Anarumo to kind of go with the past schemes and tactics that worked well against Mahomes. What does that mean for the pass rush? Well, a lot of drop baits, right? A lot of surprise pressures on third down, a lot of sim pressures, if you will. When talking about the pass rush, though, with the defensive line and how important it is to contain Patrick Mahomes rather than just try to win as a pass rusher within the first couple of seconds, I'm really curious as to how they kind of handle and deploy Sheldon Rankins in this case, because last week should have been a situation where he should have probably had a sack. He should have won more as a pass rusher. He was kind of taken out of the game more than you would like to see, and that led to the defensive line being completely carried by Trey Hendrickson. But facing Jacoby Brissett and facing Patrick Mahomes as a defensive line is two totally different types of tasks. And I don't know if you want Rankins to be penetrating immediately, and that task is going to be harder too, because like Joe mentioned, it's the best interior offensive line in the NFL, bar none. Joe Thuney, Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, right? It's going to be really hard for Rankins and his contemporaries there to actually gain penetration on Mahomes. But again, that's not necessarily the key to beat him. It's just trying to slow him down and trying to confuse what he sees down the field. So then he's kind of in a pocket that slowly gets more condensed, so he's not able to escape. So how they respond from last week in terms of just winning as pass rushers while also not making sure that you're letting Mahomes get out of the pocket, do what he does best, because that's how you can put up 40 on you.
I hate to be the old school mindset guy, but based on what we saw from the passing game last week for the Bengals, what some of the effective plays on offense for them were later in the game, being on the ground and Zach Moss, obviously trying to do the old cliche, keep the other offense off the field, that sort of thing. You don't have T. Higgins this week. You had output from other people not named Jamar Chase. Drop in the end zone from Gesicki, Hudson fumbling the ball, who, by the way, he looks like he's doubtful this week too. The output was everywhere else, and Burrow missed reads, right? I mean, there were some opportunities that he missed too. I mean, is this the quintessential old motto? Let's get the run game going, the controlled passing / screen game going, that sort of thing this week because of the opponent. I was on our friend Strawberry Ice's show, and the great Parker Blake joined us as well. And we kind of talked about this being an aspect of the Bengals attack this week. So I wanted to ask you about that.
I think a couple things here. Like, the Ravens' inability to run on Kansas City last week was pretty stark, and I think Joe was kind of alluding to that. The fact that Derrick Henry never got going, and that might be more of an indictment on the fact that the Ravens' offensive line is just not what it used to be. But this is still a Bengals. This is still a Bengals offensive line that I don't think their strength is necessarily just power blocking, right? And I don't know if they can just line up under center, maybe go in these jumbo packages and just push the Chiefs' notoriously stingy defense off the line like that. So I think in theory that would be something that could definitely help, but also like there's going to be some type of balance with the run game. They're still going to want to run out of shotgun because that's where Zach Moss is really comfortable with. But I really do think that it just sets up as that quintessential type of prove it game for Burrow in the passing game, coming off of a bad week, obviously playing your most notorious foe that you've had, back and forths with. The pressure to succeed without T. Higgins, especially with guys like James Jones saying that you're average without two elite receivers on the outside. Like, I feel like we're not going to see that total shift to the ground and pound smash mouth type of atmosphere in this game, especially because I think you still have question marks with the Chiefs secondary. You just saw them give up 200 yards to Isaiah Likely at tight end. So that's a signal for Gesicki to get more involved, to try to exploit whatever problems that they still have that they may not have solved within the past 9 or 10 days or so. I do think that we're not going to see that complete shift in terms of pass run balance just yet. And that might be what needs to happen if they want to get the entire offense going for the rest of the season.
And I think this is an interesting week to see how Eric All is implemented, if really at all. I mean, he had some nice moments blocking last week. I think there are some formations you can use wherein he can continue to be effective there. And then, as you mentioned, some exploiting of the Kansas City defense with tight ends. This may be a good week for him. Again, you would think that Hudson, based on Zach Taylor's comments on Friday, it sounds like Hudson's going to maybe sit this one out. So maybe it is All and McLaughlin who gets elevated and they figure some things out from there. Gesicki, of course, another, and Gesicki is a little bit more in line with what Likely's skill set is, right? Kind of the split out guy a little bit. So that's going to be an intriguing thing for me in this one. And, I still think, and we can kind of transition this a little bit to a talking point of, okay, as you look at people who were the players who were active and doing some things last week, whether or not they made mistakes, whether or not they made a positive impact, who are the guys this week that you're like, give me like 2 or 3 guys where you're like, this person needs to either improve his play, this person needs to step up this week, this person is going to play a key role this week in this game?
It starts with the quarterback. I mean, you need Joe Burrow to play better. You just do. You need him to be able to recognize that, hey, like, I got time in the pocket. I understand how to feel pressure. I've been doing this for 4 years, and continue to look downfield, right? Taking your checkdowns and taking what the defense gives you, that's fine to sustain drives. But I think the Ravens did prove that you do need those explosive plays if you want to take advantage of the Chiefs defense. It's so tough to go 10, 11, 12 plays against Steve Spagnuolo and just expect to get 6 points at the end of it. So your quarterback not being afraid to let it rip and give your guys one-on-one opportunities. Like, don't be afraid of that. That has to be what happens this week. Alex Kappa, I think, also on the offensive side of the ball, he's got the toughest matchup with Chris Jones. Yep. I think in general, the Chiefs pass rush outside of Chris Jones, I don't want to be like, it's not that great. Like, Carl Loftus is really good. I think he's developing fine. I think they can be able to block Mike Dana and Warden, their other pass rushers. But obviously, it starts and ends with Chris Jones. And there's going to be more attention on him than just Alex Kappa. But Alex Kappa did not play well against the Patriots. And you have to wonder how he's going to fare against literally the best defensive tackle in football. And then going back to the defensive side of the ball and defending Mahomes, Sam Hubbard, man, like the things that he has done so well in recent years and just in his entire career looked nothing like that against the Patriots. Missed tackles, not being that edge setter at the line of scrimmage, just letting short yardage turn into medium and long yardage. Like against Pacheco and that stable of running backs, like that's a death sentence. So those guys just playing like their old selves and just Burrow looking like his old self, that alone, I think, can put the Bengals closer towards the Chiefs in this one. But obviously, it's a cyclical thing, right? It's a bi-weekly thing. Like you might have some guys who played well last week not have their best games this time because of whatever matchups or maybe play on the road or whatever the case may be. So it is tough when you're in the state of your roster where you're not really sure that you can count on like a lot of guys to be consistent on a week-to-week basis. Maybe you have a bounce back from Trent Brown. Maybe you have obviously a bounce back from Jamar Chase in terms of participation and getting the ball within the first quarter, whatever. But those guys stand out to me for sure.
I'm going to point out a couple that don't necessarily, they didn't have bad games or anything last week. It's just we're going to probably need to see more of the good plays we did see from them last week. One is Yoshi. I think just with the potential inactivation or deactivation, I guess I should say, of T. Higgins, his role is going to need to be elevated. And, had a couple of nice moments, had the fourth down that came up short, all that kind of stuff. There's just going to need to be more there. There's going to need to be more and bigger plays, like you said, contested catches potentially, exploiting the one-on-ones, that sort of thing. He had an outstanding camp. Let's see it put to work, right? Let's see it in action week 2 in Arrowhead. That's one guy I think. And again, if you do tend to lean on the run a little bit more, depending on what that may or may not look like, Drew Sample is really coming into his own as a so last week on the Zach Moss touchdown, if you go back and watch that play, Drew Sample absolutely buried a defender. And at first glance, I couldn't, the way the camera angles were and everything, I couldn't see exactly who that was. But rewatching it, I'm like, he absolutely buried that guy. And I think he hit someone before burying that guy. So he actually made two blocks on the play, which kind of sprung the whole play there. So I think he's going to have to be a quietly integral part in what they do, especially in the run game there. So those are two guys, again, some good moments last week, but need more and need to see more out of that. And the third guy, everybody's talking about this guy because of Higgins potentially being out, the offense not scoring points. And this may be a few minute topic of its own here, John, and that's Jermaine Burton. A lot of chatter about where is he? Obviously we mentioned him about potentially being a little bit in the doghouse because of study habits or work habits, whatever that may be. Is that right now, if you're staring down the barrel of 0-2, 2 conference losses, 1-2, the Chiefs potentially, if that, is the reality. I mean, is it just like, maybe we ought to let go of this a little bit here and at least get him out there for a couple of big play opportunities and see what happens? Or is it still, just can't trust him? Let's keep sending the message that we're sending to the rest of the team.
I mean, I think you just stole my exact thought when you mentioned Jermaine Burton. At this point, you don't have much to lose. And that's crazy to say for September 13th as we're recording this, but no, like I've gone back to the 2023 championship game so many times in the past couple of years and how inept the passing game looked when Trenton Irwin was out there, and just the fact that he couldn't get open in one-on-one situations, and how the Chiefs secondary, despite maybe some talent deficiencies here and there, they just know how to close off certain parts of the field. They know how to stay with guys in man coverage. And Irwin is just, it's a disservice sometimes to see him play 40, 30, 50 snaps out there. Getting him in and out of the game more often with Burton, and just let Burton's speed and explosion, just the threat of that, your cornerbacks will play more oft, and they won't just crowd the sticks for that inevitable hitch route that the Bengals like to just spam at certain times. Like the threat of that speed, it just matters. And to have that more on the field, like even if you don't fully trust him with certain plays, just having him out. He only ran one route last week. One route and 4 snaps. Like get him 5 routes, get him 8 routes. Like obviously it could just be the duration of a drive, but to have Trenton Irwin out there for so long, it doesn't serve his athleticism well. It's a disservice to him, if I'm being quite honest with you, and it's an advantage to the Chiefs. Whatever you can do to kind of switch that to make sure that it's not all on Chase to kind of just go 266 yards again like he did 3 years ago, that should be what the Bengals should do.
I mean, there are some early similarities, and not just round drafted, and maybe some rumblings of, either off-field stuff or work habits, all that kind of stuff. There are some Chris Henry-esque type of situations with this. And if you think back to that, remember Marvin was reluctant to kind of get him on the field because, did he do what he was, early in his career? Was he doing the right things? Remember, Marvin was a big veterans over rookies guy. Stick with the guys that you know what you're going to get out of instead of the wild card players. And then it kind of like what happened with Burfict and Ray Maualuga kind of early in his deal. It's just like, it's too good to keep him off the field early. He's too, even if there are some, wild card type of plays in there, he's too good. And I feel like there's a little bit of semblance of that with Burton here, where it's like, it's too exciting to really keep it completely under wraps. Now, I understand maybe you don't want him running, attempting to run complete route trees and all this kind of stuff if the trust isn't there. But like you said, even if on a decoy basis, I mean, the film is out there. Even if he's out there on a decoy basis, garnering attention, I think you need to see more of it. And I think, it's the same thing with Osai on his limited snaps and pass rush attempts last week. You got to get more out of players like that and game plan differently, because your definition of insanity, you do it again, you're likely to get a similar result, particularly against a much, much better opponent than the Patriots.
I was going to say, you don't even have to go back to the Marvin Lewis era for an example here. T. Higgins, as a rookie, did not. I don't know if he played at all in the week 1, but John Ross started, and John Ross didn't have a good game. And then 4 days later, because the Bengals played Thursday night in week 2 that year against the Browns, it was T. Higgins starting, and he had a decent game. And from then on, Higgins played like I think he started the rest of the season, and he was the team's leading receiver. That's not going to happen with Jermaine Burton, but we've seen, at least in Zach Taylor's time, rookies, particularly receivers, like sometimes those who aren't Jamar Chase, they do take a minute, right? It took Yoshi like 5-6 weeks to get involved, even though T. Higgins was dealing with injuries, and he eventually kind of found his little niche role, and that's possible with Jermaine Burton. But there is a timeline here where a rookie wide receiver drafted, in day 2, just like T. Higgins, doesn't play week 1, is still kind of learning his role and finding himself in the offense. And then week 2, week 3 comes around, you're involved a little bit more, and your natural talent starts to take over against a pretty talented defense. So that could be a situation here. There is precedent for that for sure.
Yeah, and I'm looking back. You said the week 1 game with John Ross not going well, and then Higgins came out and played well. I think initially I was like, wait a minute, that week 1 game against Seattle, he did awesome, right? It was the big. But I think you're referring to 2020
yes,
when he was out there against the Chargers. He had like 2 catches. So yeah, that now I'm with you on that one. But yeah, so and then T. Higgins emerged and ended up being, I think, the team's leading receiver, I think, that year.
He was.
Going forward. So yeah, it's kind of, again, it's not abandon ship, or what is it? Let's throw complete caution to the wind because the season's in jeopardy because it's week 2, but you got to start gaining some ground. And again, another 0-2 start as a possibility. Being, is being right, quote unquote, being right about something, is that worth the potential of harming the team or harming results, right? I mean, do you want to be right about your messaging and that sort of thing, or do you want to potentially win football games? Now, again, we're not in that locker room, we're not in those position group meetings, so there's probably more dynamics at play than we're talking about. But I think there is an opportunity, at least in a somewhat incremental increase from last week, to get him involved. And I just to kind of sidestep that. I don't like looking back and saying, about players who aren't here anymore and say, what could have been. But how much do you think, just especially with the early season struggle, this week 1 struggle, he didn't have a big effect in Tennessee, but I mean, just the Tyler Boyd not having that kind of security blanket. I know he's towards the end of his career. I just kind of had this thought, like, what do you think that is something they are still trying to work through personnel wise and scheme wise at this point? And that's maybe why there's a little bit of a stumble on offense, or is that just me going revisionist history and romanticizing Tyler Boyd and his time in Bengals history too much.
Yeah, I think both Boyd and Joe Mixon, who was a topic of conversation too, like I think if they were still on the team, they would have good weeks, right? Maybe last week was a situation where Boyd would have been very useful. Obviously, you don't make those decisions based off of single games; you make them based off of season-long outlooks. And I think we can all agree, and I'm not saying that you're not saying this, but I think we can all agree that the time had come for both Boyd and Mixon to move on and try out their luck in different situations. But I think specifically with the receivers, Higgins tweaking his hamstring was just the biggest wrench thrown into that. And I just don't think that they were prepared. Even if they started Irwin for Chase throughout camp, they always knew that Chase would eventually come back and play. And then they could just have Irwin as the first receiver off the bench. I don't think they actually expected him to start and catch for one pass for 6 yards against the Patriots, on like 40 something routes. So yeah, I think Irwin playing for Higgins is more of an issue than missing your slot, because I think they had a lot of confidence in Yoshi just filling in for Boyd and having that spot be rotated in and out, getting Gesicki more involved, and et cetera.
Okay, so let's talk before we do predictions and stuff. Do you want to talk a couple of key specific matchups that you'll be keeping an eye on personnel wise this week? I mean, I know we've talked kind of key players, so that points to maybe some of the specific matchups, but I don't know, anything else where you're going, hey, this specific aspect, not so much the player, but this matchup, excuse me, is kind of what I'm keeping my eye on this week.
Well, I am interested to see how the Chiefs kind of evolve their plan against tight ends, because you have a bevy of them for the Bengals, but none of them are quite like Isaiah Likely. Like maybe Eric All is most comparable, but I don't think you trust Eric All with like 9 or whatever targets that Isaiah Likely got last week. Do you play Mike Gesicki more? He had 18 snaps last week. Obviously the drop stood out, but I think he was fine other than that. So that's one thing to watch. But also, Joe said it, L'Jarius Sneed is no longer there. And there's kind of not a hole necessarily a cornerback, but they're trusting, I believe Jalen Watson is the other cornerback aside from Trent McDuffie. Is McDuffie just going to be doing what Snead did with Chase and just following him? Because McDuffie is one of the best young cornerbacks in the game, bar none. He's so well-rounded as a player, and I'm curious if the plan with Chase is to just replace Snead with McDuffie in that sense. I don't know if that's what they're going to do with him throughout the season against your alpha receivers that you face, but the Chiefs had a plan for negating Chase after, again, he almost dropped 300 yards on them the first time he played, and it's been a really even battle since then where Chase is, I don't think he's hit the century mark since then, but he's had some quality games. But now with Snead no longer there, I'm curious if it's just going to be McDuffie following him, or if there's going to have just some type of bracket coverage regardless of who's on him.
Yeah, and I think this is a good time. Rick is asking, we've mentioned some of the injuries. I'll pull up the actual Friday injury report here for you all to, and we can kind of go through it a little bit here, but a couple of major key players for Cincinnati are doubtful. You see T. Higgins, Amarius Mims, Tanner Hudson, doubtful. I don't know. Yeah, here's the chart. Look at the lengthy injury report for the Bengals. You got Joe Burrow on there, of course, the wrist, full participant all week, though. Higgins did not practice all week, and usually if you're doubtful and you did not practice all week, that's a pretty strong sign that you're not playing Sunday. BJ Hill was limited on Wednesday with a knee. I think there also might have been a little bit of a, maybe light veteran rest there. Hudson with the knee didn't practice, did limited on Thursday, then didn't practice again on Friday. So that's probably not looking great for him. Chris Jenkins, we know about the thumb. I think he either already underwent a procedure or will be going through that. So he is out, did not practice all week. Amarius Mims did go limited all week. He is doubtful. Would be nice to potentially have him to go in some of those tackle eligible jumbo packages, that sort of thing that we've talked about a little bit. Moss on the injury report with a neck, but he went full the most of the week there. Sample, again, he popped up with biceps, full practice. And then Geno Stone, you mentioned the back. He went limited Friday, but I don't know that there's a ton of worry there. We'll see. And then Logan Wilson should be good to go. Full practice Friday. You see here the Chiefs, Marquise Brown, and you heard he is out. So you heard Joe Valerio say that he believes he will be out, and he is indeed out. Nick Bolton, the linebacker, an elbow full, and the rest of the guys, on there are full. So a little bit of a disparity, John, in terms of amount of players on there. And you see here full practice for pretty much everybody on the Chiefs except for Marquise Brown, who is out.
Yeah, so I think the most interesting thing here is Geno Stone, just because you had T. Higgins being limited Thursday last week with a hamstring, then he didn't practice. You don't know if that's the case with Stone, where if there was no day of practice, he wouldn't play. I think that conversation will probably dwindle into the weekend. He might be a game time decision, but yeah, everyone who's doubtful here is not going to play. I think if it was a different type of injury, Higgins is obviously good enough where he can play in an emergency situation just because he's that valuable and that good. But I don't think they want to risk him re-aggravating already a pretty tricky injury. And yeah, like with Hudson not practiced, that was interesting how he went limited and then didn't practice. Maybe they just didn't want to push him. And with Mims, I think doubtful is a little bit harsh considering he did practice all week, but I think that was just the case of knowing that he wasn't going to play anyways. So this is just them basically saying he's not going to play unless he absolutely has to.
Yeah, this would be a nice, I know he's not listed on the injury report, but is on IR. Having Miles Murphy back for this one and a couple of other just healthy bodies, man, it'd be helpful for the Bengals to have that. Let's kind of start talking about predictions, what we think is going to happen, and start getting on out of here. What do you think, John? What's on your mind with this one? Where's your mind headed? Are you with Joe Valerio on a potential blowout for the Chiefs?
I think that's one of the likely scenarios, yes. But this matchup does have a history of being close regardless of the circumstances. I don't think anyone expected the Bengals to be up by 17 points last year with Jake Browning at quarterback in Kansas City. Obviously, Kansas City came back and won the game, whatever. But it's always been like a 3-point decision. I think the Chiefs, in terms of aggregate score, are just like 2 points ahead of the Bengals, and they're 3-2 in this matchup since that AFC North clinching victory for the Bengals. A lot of expectations get defied when these two teams play, and this is a scenario where nothing seems to be going right for the Bengals, and there's no real rationale or logic behind them going into Kansas City in the current state of the team and coming out on top as victors without one of their best players, T. Higgins, which is exactly why I feel like that's going to happen. Like, just classic. You don't expect them to win at all, and then somehow they win. So I think the Bengals cover. It's like a 6-point spread. If they win, it might just be at the gun, but I don't know, man. I just feel like this team has the tendency to just say, like, you were talking all that stuff and counting us out and everything like that, and somehow they just managed to do it. The problem is happening this early in the season, less likely. This is typically stuff for October, November, December when they get things figured out, and that's the biggest thing where I'm just on the edge here because like week 2, this team never has stuff figured out, and no matter how motivated they are about everything going against them and being the true underdog, week 2 is just still really rough for them. So
they have not won a week 2 game under Zach Taylor, right?
So it's like everything is kind of countering out against everything. I still feel like they're going to prove me wrong in some way, and maybe that is a win, but I'll just be a coward and say 24-20 Chiefs.
Yeah, I don't think I actually disagree with the blowout sentiment for Kansas City. If you look, like you said, if you look at the history of the last 5 times in the Burrow era that these teams have met, you mentioned last year's game with Browning under center, they lost by 8 points, right? It was 25-17, I think was the end score there. So essentially a 1-possession game, and that's with your backup quarterback and having the lead in Arrowhead late in the season. So, I don't, and you look at the previous 4, all 4 of those were decided by a field goal, right? And they were all in either the low to mid 20s or the high 30s in terms of points scored. So I don't see this being a blowout, despite how poorly the Bengals played last week, and how poorly they've played in weeks 1 and 2. And I mean, if you go back to the week 2 game against Baltimore last year, the Bengals did not play well in that game. I think they lost by 1 possession in that one. So I think they'll get some footing. I think this will be closer than most people expected to. I also think the Bengals are, despite being down some players, I think they're hyper motivated, as they always are, to play this team. So I expect it to be close. I'm still going to say the Chiefs in probably a field goalish type of fashion. I think the Bengals are still trying to find certain things that work. I think they're missing too many key players at this point in time. I don't think they play well at the beginning of the year, all of the things, but I think they'll put forth a good effort and a good result despite it potentially being a loss. So the problem with that is that you're once again 0-2 and you got to climb yourself out of a pretty big hole there. And it's kind of one of those things again, week 3. I feel like this has been a couple of times this season, week 3, or a couple of times recently, whether it's week 3 or a little bit towards the middle of the season, where it takes the big primetime Ring of Honor game maybe to get the win and get things kind of back on track. We've seen that a couple of times so far.
History just continues to repeat itself, and until it doesn't, like, it's just like, why go against what has happened before, right? So yeah, like I really like, and also last year I remember, like, because they were so bad in week 1 and they came back to almost beat the Ravens in week 2 after really starting poorly in the first half. I could easily see that kind of happening again this time, where the Chiefs kind of go out early. Any hope of a balanced attack on offense kind of goes out the window when you're in that deficit again. And that's when I kind of expect Burrow to kind of lock in and look a lot better than he did last year. The question is, will it be enough? It's really just hard to come back and win in Kansas City, but man, they've done it before. So you just never know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's start packing up and getting on out of here. It's more, we usually drop the mic and either have a strong take or something like that. I want to bring up this one, Chris Canty on First Take. Did you happen to see, I think it was yesterday actually, but did you happen to see Chris Canty, or was this one today? I know maybe he's been on a roll the past couple of days.
I don't even know what First Take is anymore. Is it still on ESPN? Like, what is that show?
Yeah. It's a commentary show, but Chris Canty, obviously longtime player in the league and had some strong stuff. I think Zim made the comment. Our buddy Zim Hude relayed the clip and kind of said he's selling his stock on the Bengals, that sort of thing. And so you got people kind of bailing on the Bengals bandwagon pretty early. I understand the sentiment in a way because of what the Bengals showed and against whom in week 1, but is this just a short-sighted thing, or I don't know. I feel like, hey, for those who have been around these parts for a little bit, maybe keep an eye on things in October and November. Joe Valerio, who joined us, seemed to know and monitor the fact that the Bengals pick things up later in the season. So I don't know. Does this season strike you as anything different than what we've seen in these first 2 weeks of the season out of Zach Taylor and company?
Oh man, it's just I don't think former Ravens players like the Bengals very much. This is a very common thing. But yeah, man, it's just I think there is kind of a sense of like maybe the Bengals in some ways don't get the criticism that other teams do when they kind of fall short, because they're but they have past examples of them, winning in big games. So maybe that sometimes sparks takes like this where it's like, enough with this, like we need to set the Bengals to a higher standard and stuff like this. But it just comes off in just the most careless and sometimes frankly unprofessional ways, where it's not really based on anything analytical or anything objective. It's really just all vibes. Yeah. And which is the industry. And that's why Stephen A. Smith is like 80 years old and somehow still relevant, because he just knows how to evolve with the game. And that's why there's not an objective bone in his body.
Yeah. Well, what do you is that your mic drop? Since
no, it was not, because this is still the Bengals. I think for as long as they are in this core of team in the locker room and have this kind of swagger, I think they will always approach the Chiefs the same way. And that's pretty unabashedly and pretty matter of fact. And that's what led to Cam Taylor-Britt talking about Xavier Worthy, saying that he's fast, he's got speed. And somehow that became bulletin board material for the Chiefs. And I've been laughing about it ever since. Not in the sense of not in the sense that of anything about like, oh, why are the Bengals doing this again? But it's like, what is Xavier Worthy going to do? Not be fast to spite the Bengals? Like, he's fast. That's how he scored twice against the Ravens. If he scores against the Bengals again, guess what? He's going to be fast, and it's going to be tough for the Bengals to catch him. That's what he does well. not calling him Megatron at the catch point is not some type of motivation to transform Xavier Worthy into a player that he's not yet is, or maybe never will be. He's really fast, and when you don't get your hands on him, he will beat you. Like that just is what it is. The fact that everything has to be made into bulletin board material because these two teams play each other, it's ridiculous. Xavier Worthy is not going to not be fast despite the Bengals. I don't understand that.
Yeah, and it's in a rivalry like this, it's sometimes it is what is said, and sometimes it's taking something of what's not said, right? And everything, a lot of things can come off as a slight or be perceived as a slight when they actually aren't. And it just shows the edginess between the two teams, right? I mean, it just shows the passion and the disdain that these teams have kind of built about each other the past couple of seasons. It's a shame that the Bengals weren't full go last year, at least with their quarterback and some other things happening, but they're still kind of not full go right now with the injuries, but that's part of football. And so they got to play Sunday, and the Chiefs have to take care of business. A lot of chips are stacked in the favor of the Kansas City Chiefs being by the way, how did the Chiefs and the schedule makers get 2 home games to start the season against 2 of the toughest AFC opponents, or perceived toughest AFC opponents, and get a mini bye between two home games? I don't really, I mean, it's like, wow, they teed that up pretty nicely for 2 difficult games to start the year.
Well, I think, and this was lost on me until someone brought it up, this game is going to be on 9/15. So I don't know if that was just like a Burrow Mahomes type of ploy in terms of the date. But yeah, whatever.
See, I'm not smart enough to make that observation. So that would make sense. But at any rate, hey, it's going to be a good one. I think it's going to be a fun one, a lot more fun than last week. I mean, what wouldn't be more fun than last week's output? Good God. But the Bengals hopefully will take care of business against the Chiefs and start to get things rolling, but it's going to be a tough test for sure. Our thanks to Joe Valerio, former Kansas City offensive lineman and BLEAV in Chiefs co-host. My thanks to you, John Sheeran, for all of your insight and making time for the program, and for we've got a lot of people tuning in live across a lot of different platforms. Thank you to the live viewers, and thank you to those who listen after the fact. Again, this is the Orange and Black Insider, part of the BLEAV in Cincy podcast channel, along with a full slate of other shows. Go check it out. Resubscribe to that feed. If you can, leave us a review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Keep it to cincyjungle.com and to A to Z sports.com for all your Bengals and AFC North analysis. John, have a good weekend ahead, my friend, and we'll be back talking about what happens on Sunday evening.
Oh boy, let's do it.